30,000 miles. A tread depth gauge on a garage floor, and a set of Pirellis with the rear pair down to nothing, while the fronts still look almost usable. That's the moment a lot of Model 3 performance owners meet the real cost of the car. Not the day they bought it, and not the day it did 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds, but the day somebody hands them the quote for the second set of tires. 30,000 is a genuinely interesting number to stop at too. You're well past the teething stuff. You're not yet at the point where the basic warranty runs out. It's the mileage where you find out whether a fast car is a car you actually want. How this channel works, briefly. I don't drive these cars, and I never claim to. What I do is read long-term ownership threads, tire invoices people photograph, reliability surveys, recall filings, and the posts where somebody works out loud whether they made the right call. Where the evidence runs thin, I'll say so out loud rather than dress it up. This is the picture as of the end of July 2026. Let's start with the thing that keeps people in this car because it's substantial. 510 horsepower, 546 pound-feet. 0 to 60 quoted at 2.9 seconds. Adaptive dampers, the first Model 3 to get them. Track Mode V3, which ties the suspension, powertrain, and cooling together. 20-inch forged warp wheels staggered with Pirelli P0s. Better seats and bigger brakes than the long range, and owners who have both are unusually consistent about the suspension. The complaint that defined earlier performance cars, that brittle, punishing ride, is largely gone. One owner who'd had an earlier performance on 18s said the new car on 20s rode better than the old one did. That's a real engineering result, and it's the reason this car works as a daily driver rather than a weekend toy you make excuses for. The battery at this mileage is the good news nobody makes videos about. Degradation on Highland generation cars is commonly reported in the 2 to 4% band somewhere between 18 and 31,000 miles. Zoom out further, and there's a 2018 Model 3 at 150,000 miles on its original battery and motors, showing around 10% of actual range lost, and a UK taxi that covered 238,000 miles in 4 years, where the things that needed replacing were suspension bushings, rear motor mounts, and a pedestrian warning speaker. Hold on to that taxi, because it tells you exactly where to point your worry, not the battery, not the motors. The chassis were items, the boring, mechanical, entirely conventional things that any heavy, fast car eats through eventually. Right, the tires properly, because on this specific car, they are the whole ownership story. The performance runs a staggered setup, 235/35 on the front, 275/30 on the rear. Different sizes front and back means you cannot rotate front to rear. Tesla's own manual says staggered cars can only be rotated side to side. And here's the detail that catches people out. One owner pointed out that a tire's mileage warranty is typically halved on a staggered fitment, precisely because you can't rotate them properly. So what do owners actually pay? A U.S. owner posted $1,600 all in for a set of Michelin Pilot Sport 4S through Costco. An Australian owner replacing the same tire in 20-inch reported $559 per corner and $2,260 all in once balancing. An alignment check and disposal were added. Call that around 1,100 pounds. Premium replacement tires in this class sit roughly $200 to $300 a corner before fitting. Rear tires on a rear-biased 500 horsepower car do not last. Some owners get 30,000 miles from a set of Michelins. Owners running the factory P0s, a max performance summer tire, report considerably less. And the ones who drive it the way it invites you to drive it report much less again. One longtime owner summed up the arithmetic bluntly. Whatever you save on petrol, you spend on rubber. I read that line in 3 separate threads, phrased slightly differently each time, and it's the most honest sentence written about this car. That's not a defect, it's physics and a tire choice. But if you budgeted for a cheap-to-run EV and bought the fast one 30,000 miles is exactly where that assumption falls over. Cold weather is the second half of the same problem. Summer tires in a staggered setup in a Canadian or Scottish winter are not an option. They're a hazard. And finding winter or all-season rubber in staggered 20-inch sizes is genuinely awkward. Owners who thought about this before buying were already discussing it. A separate set of winter wheels and tires, usually in a smaller size, which is another significant outlay before you've turned a wheel. If you live somewhere with real winters, price that in as part of the car, not an accessory. Roads, then. The performance sits at 128 millimeters of ground clearance, about 5 inches, which is low and lower than the long range. Owners report scraping the underbody and bumpers on speed bumps and uneven surfaces, and paint chips on the bonnet are described as fairly common across the Highland Range. One performance owner reported destroying a wheel on a pothole. Interestingly, other owners push back hard on the idea that the forged 20s are fragile, arguing they're stronger and lighter than the 19s. I can't settle that from where I'm sitting, and I'm not going to pretend I can. What I can say is that big wheels and low-profile tires on bad roads is a known equation in every performance car ever made, city driving and efficiency. The 20s cost you range. Owners who swapped 18s report the efficiency gap with the long range nearly disappearing. Rated range is 296 miles, and you should expect real-world figures under that, particularly in winter, and particularly on the factory rubber. Long motorway runs are where the trade-off shows up in a different way. The car will take 237 kilometers of charge in about 15 minutes on a 250-kilowatt supercharger. The seats are better than the long-range ones, and the Highland cabin is quiet by Tesla standards, but Max Performance Summer Rubber is not quiet rubber, and that's the noise you hear at 70, not wind tires. Owners who move to a touring or all-season tire almost always mention the cabin getting noticeably calmer as a side effect they didn't expect. And the track question. Since track mode is a headline feature, the people who actually take these to circuits talk about two limits: brakes and heat. Even one prospective owner talking himself into the car admitted he'd criticized both before conceding he hadn't been to a track in years and would be using it for the occasional backroad blast. That's most of you, honestly. If you genuinely intend repeated hard laps, budget for pads and fluid as consumables, and go and read the track threads before you rely on the standard setup. Now the faults that show up in the ownership record, and they're smaller than the internet suggests. Early performance builds attracted reports of vibration, rattles, and minor water leaks, generally addressed under warranty. Headlight condensation appears across the Highland Range, treated as a warranty item if it's more than light misting, and ride quality complaints on the bigger wheel packages, which is a taste question as much as a fault. The turn signal buttons, on cars built before Tesla brought the stock back, remain the daily irritation people mention most. On the official record, certain 2025 Model 3s built between March and August of last year were recalled because a battery pack contactor could fail and cause a sudden loss of drive power, with free replacement and letters mailed in December. There's also been a seat back fastener campaign and a rear view camera fix delivered over the air. Run your own VIN through Tesla's or NHTSA's lookup. It takes a minute and it beats any list, including this one: maintenance. Since there isn't a service schedule in the traditional sense, Tesla asks for rotation every 6,250 miles, or when tread depth differs by 230 seconds, and on a performance, most owners bring that forward to around 5,000. Alignment gets checked yearly or after anything unpleasant, and these cars are sensitive to it. Misalignment shows up as tire cost, not a warning light. Cabin filter every couple of years, brake fluid tested every 2, and in cold, salty climates, the calipers want lubricating annually. Money beyond the rubber. Insurance on a performance runs above the long range, though owners cross-shopping the two generally report the gap being smaller than they feared. Depreciation on the Model 3 broadly runs around 20 to 25% in year 1 and 30 to 40% by year 3. And the performance trim carries a premium new, which means the absolute number you lose is larger even when the percentage looks similar. A car with 30,000 miles on it, healthy battery data, and a documented tire and alignment history sells for meaningfully more than an identical one without the paperwork. Keep the invoices. That's the cheapest thing in this video. Here's the thing worth thinking hardest about at 30,000 miles. What's coming? In the U.S., the basic vehicle warranty runs 4 years or 50,000 miles. In several other markets, it's 4 years or 80,000 kilometers, while Australian buyers now get 5 years and unlimited kilometers. Battery and drive unit are covered 8 years or 120,000 miles. So at 30,000, you have a window. And the things to have looked at inside it are the ones the high-mileage cars flag: bushings, suspension components, anything that started making a noise you've been ignoring. The heat pump is the low-probability, high-cost item on this generation, not common at all on the evidence I found. Expensive if it happens outside cover, the ex-owner picture, and I have to be honest about its limits. This exact car is young enough that people who've owned one and sold it are thin on the ground, and I'd rather tell you that than borrow somebody's Model S story and pass it off. What has come through repeatedly in the threads is the regret that never quite happens. Owners talking themselves through performance versus long range, with experienced people saying plainly that the long range is beyond good for 99% of drivers and saves you several thousand. And the counter-argument from someone who'd been there: if you settle for the long range, you'll wonder, which is about as fair a summary as I can give you. At 30,000 miles, this is a fast, well-sorted, mechanically sound car with a running cost that is entirely about the tires and entirely predictable if you look it up first. So tell me yours. What's your climate and what's your tire mileage, actual numbers, front and rear, and what you're running? If you bought performance over long range, do you still think you were right? And if you went the other way,